Hello and welcome to my morning note. The bad news for this morning is that Spain's bond auction didn't go that well, and as a result the 10-year yield for Spain has gone back through the 7% level for a while. That crisis refuses to go away. But let's today talk about another crisis which has been much less discussed but could yet turn out to be even worse. There has been a very severe heat wave in the US this year, culminating in some extremely severe storms, and that has had a bad effect on crops. That in turn has pushed up food prices, and that could yet have a very significant impact on those countries in the developing world where food prices make up a much bigger proportion of inflation baskets. So how critical could the rises in food prices, with soybeans now at a record, be for world markets and for the economy? With me now to discuss this is our commodities correspondent, Jack Farshey. Jack, thanks very much for being here today. Let's start by taking a look at conditions in the US itself. Take me through what we're seeing here with the harvest.
So this is a chart of the proportion of the US corn crop that is in good or excellent condition. Right. Here you can see this blue line is the 5-year average. The green line was last year, a little bit below average. Right. And the red line is what's happened this year, which
is terrible.
Biblically terrible. In fact, the worst downgrade in US crop conditions since 1988, which is well known among US farmers as the worst drought in a generation when the crop was decimated. So this is a very serious drought. And in fact, this is only as of Monday. Probably we'd expect by next Monday, when they publish this data again, for it to get worse again. Okay, and with population growth, obviously demand is very much greater now than it was in 1988.
Okay, so let's take a look at the effect on prices. Now, this chart is a day out of date, which, given the way these markets are moving, is actually quite important.
Already this morning, we've had both corn and soybeans hitting new record prices.
Right. Take me through, there are different dynamics for these different crops. Why is soy so high, and what's the importance there? And also rice appears to be behaving differently from the other crops.
So you can see here that both soybeans, the blue line, and corn, the red line that you can just about make out in the background, have both hit record highs, in fact, this morning, both surpassing their highs of 2008, which you'll remember that the rise in agricultural commodity prices then caused widespread riots across the world, and the first global food crisis that we'd seen since the 70s.
Right.
This time round, what you've got is, yes, very sharply rising corn and soybean prices is a big worry. And wheat is following those up, although it's not nearly as high as it was in 2007-8 yet. But rice, so far, this yellow line across the front of the chart, is fairly subdued, and that's because it has a completely different, almost, set of producers.
They don't make it in the prairies of the US.
Corn and soybeans are produced largely in the US, in Brazil. Rice, on the other hand, is produced in Asia, in Thailand, in India, and the crop looks fine. Stocks are very high, and prices have so far remained very subdued. The big worry has got to be if this price action in corn, soybeans, and wheat ends up being passed through into rice, maybe by panic buying by consumers, that kind of thing, then we have a really big problem on our hands.
Okay, and now let's take a look at soybean prices, because the particular problem with soybeans is that while Chinese people don't necessarily eat many soybeans, they do feed them to their animals. And so this chart appears to show that there is a distinct knock-on from soybean inflation to Chinese inflation.
Well, yes, exactly. Soybeans is China's biggest agricultural import. They're by far the world's biggest importer of soybeans, and they feed them to their pigs. And as we know, pork prices in China have a huge impact on Chinese inflation and thus the world economy. So you can see here that the annual percentage change in soybean prices has a fairly good relationship with Chinese food inflation. And if the current soybean price continues flat for the next few months, you see this is what will happen to Chinese food inflation. So that's potentially a big worry, because if Chinese food inflation picks up, Chinese inflation picks up. If Chinese inflation picks up, the Chinese central bank or the Chinese government feels less inclined to ease policy, and that's probably the one thing that's keeping markets propped up. But together with the Fed, the one thing that's keeping markets propped up at the moment is China's policy easing.
Jack, thank you very much indeed. Yes, I completely agree with that point, that if Chinese inflation takes off again, that really would be a bull in the China shop of the world economy. Of course, it's very alarming that these developments might mean that many people in the developing world starve. But I'd also draw an analogy for older viewers with the 1970s documentary called James Burke's Connections. It's quite extraordinary how apparently unconnected events like a bad summer in the US can lead to something like a change in Chinese monetary policy. There's a real risk that's going to happen.